Well, we want to welcome you. If you're here at the Lone Mountain campus, joining us up at Centennial Hills, at the RidgeLive.tv, at our Traditions venue, we are glad you're all here as we're diving into this series called Woulda, Shoulda, Coulda. Because we have all had those moments in our life, haven't we? That we look back on and we think, man, if I would have done what I should have done, this could have all been different. This could have turned out way different than it actually did. And those moments are so much easier, we said last week, they're so much easier to see in the rearview mirror than they are oftentimes coming at us in the windshield. In fact, if we could see them more clearly coming at us, we wouldn't be standing here now saying, if I would have done what I should have done, then it could have been different. We all have those moments that if we could go back and do them over, we would all go back and do them over, wouldn't we? We'd take another run at those things, go back and make decisions differently, to think differently about how we approach that so that we don't end up where we are. We think if I would have just been a little more responsible back then, if I would have just made some wiser choices, if I would have just had a little more discipline in my life, if I would have just been a little more patient, then I wouldn't be sitting in the mess that I'm sitting in right now. Because we all know that one of these days, and Drew talked about this back in the family series when we talked about that, and we're continuing to talk about this through this summer. We all know that at some point in our life, maybe it's going to be after the next season of our life, maybe it'll be at our high school reunion someday, somebody's going to show up and ask us, what happened to you? And hopefully they won't say it like that. I mean, hopefully they'll be thinking, man, how did you get where you are? How did you get the kind of life that you got? How did you get where you got in life? What happened to you? And we want at that moment to be able to tell a great story of how we ended up where we ended up, of how we got God involved in our life and how we began to live life by a different set of principles than everybody else lived by, and we ended up in a different kind of place than we would have had we just ignored some of these principles along the way. And so during this series, we're going to be asking some questions. And last week, we asked the question about responsibility. And the reason that we're asking questions is because if we keep asking these questions, they will actually change the trajectory of our life. They will change where we ended up. Last week, we asked the question, am I being responsible with everything I've been given? Because again, we look back and say, man, if I would have just been a little more responsible. Well, we can start that today by asking the question, am I being responsible with everything I've been given? So this week, we're diving into this question. This is a question, again, that we should always ask, that we should constantly be asking our life. And the question is this: what is the wisest thing to do? If we're going to live with wisdom, if we're going to make better decisions and make better choices, we need to ask the question, what is the wisest thing to do? And here's where each week kind of starts fitting together if you're following along with us, all right? Responsibility, if we're going to live lives of responsibility, we need to understand that living responsibly is nothing more than us making a series of wise decisions. That as we put wise decision together with wise decision with wise decision, if we do that long enough, then we will be living responsibly. Living responsibly is nothing more than us living out a series of wise decisions. How many fewer regrets for all of us would be in our life if we had just asked this question along the way? What is the wisest thing to do? Because we know that our decisions shape our story, right? All of us can look back at the decisions that we made along the way and know that it's the decisions that we made along the way that shape our story. They shape our story more than our circumstances, more than our upbringing, more than our hurts, more than our failures. All those things play a role in our life. Our circumstances oftentimes, our background, our upbringing oftentimes, those things become the background, the wallpaper of our life. But it is the decisions of our life that really begin to shape our story and determine where we come out. You know, think about the stories that you've heard about people's lives. I mean, you hear these overcomer kind of stories, right? Where somebody's life seemed to be heading in a really bad direction. A lot of bad things have been happening to them. But then at the end of their life, at the end of the journey, at the end of their story, they're telling this story of overcoming. How the circumstances didn't get them down, and how the difficulties and the hurts and the trials that came in their life didn't determine the outcome of their life. And they all will say the same thing. At some point during the course of this transformation of their life, they will all say the same thing. They will say these words, "Then I decided. Then I made," all this stuff happened to me. I mean, all these things came into my life that I didn't want to come into my life. All these things were a part of my story back then. But at some point along the way, I decided. I made a decision that began to shape my future. When I was in college, I was playing college football, and I had just finished my junior season at Azusa Pacific University down in Southern California. I got to play linebacker down there, had a great time. It was a great school to play at, having a lot of fun, living on a college campus. And what I was doing at college was getting ready to go into the ministry. I was taking Bible classes and ministry classes because it really felt like God was sending me in the direction of being in the ministry. So I was getting ready for that, but I was getting to play football too, and it was just a great time in life. And then after the season got over with, after my junior season finished up, I got a phone call from this friend of mine who was running a church about an hour away from the school. And he asked me if I wanted to come and work as a youth pastor for him. And of course, my first question was, well, yeah, that'd be fun and all, but would I still get to play football? Because I have one more season to go. And it's going to be my senior season. And since I'm probably not going to play professional football, being slow and small and all, am I going to get to play out my senior season of football? And he said, I don't think so. This is a full-time job. We would need you full-time. So you would essentially be ending your football career if you came to work for us. And I thought, man, come on. And I realized that I was at this crossroads. This moment that I was going to leave something behind that I would never get back and go after something that I might not get another shot at. And so I thought about it long and hard. It was a really great situation to go into. It seemed like a great church, but I really wanted to play football. When it came down to it, I decided the ministry thing was going to be forever. I guess I'll go ahead and leave this behind. And I walked away from my senior season of football to pursue ministry. Now, before you think it's all noble and everything, I was not happy about it. I just want to tell you right now, it was tough to make that decision because I realized what I was leaving behind. I would never get that back. And the thought in my heart as I was making that decision was, am I going to regret this forever? And I have to admit, there have been times that I've been watching college football games and watching guys smash their head into other people and all that I've thought, yeah, I do kind of regret it. I really wish I could have been able to be a part of that. But the other thing that happened was when I went to this church, the first family that I met there, years later, would become my in-laws because I married their daughter. The decisions we make shape our story. They change the trajectory of our life. And when somebody asks us, what happened to you? How did you get like this? How did your family get like this? Our answer is going to be, well, I decided. You see, decisions will shape our story, but our decisions need a filter. If we're going to make the best decisions, and not just any decision, our decisions are going to need a filter. They're going to need a guide, a roadmap for our decisions. And that's why the Apostle Paul writes to us this letter. He didn't write it to us, he wrote it to the Ephesians. These people lived in this ancient town called Ephesus. And he writes them this letter about how they should be living their life. And in it, he says this. He says, be very careful how you live. The picture he's painting there of being careful is of a person who's taking very careful steps, watching where they put their feet. Be very careful how you're living, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. In other words, you should live this way because the days that we're living in aren't just going to naturally steer you in great directions. You're not just going to accidentally wander into good places. And he says, if you're having any trouble with what I'm saying here, let me say it one more time, even more clearly. Don't be foolish. Don't be a fool here. Don't think you're pulling one over on somebody by making choices that you think are going to get you somewhere, but they're really not. Don't be a fool here. Don't be misguided here. Don't lie to yourself here. But understand instead what the Lord's will is. It is wisdom that guides us to the best decisions. And we need it because these days that we live in are not neutral. The days that we live in are bent in the direction of evil. They're bent in the direction away from God. And if you just kind of roll with the slope, if you just kind of go with the flow, you are not going to drift into better and better things. And we know that from watching people's lives. And because of this, it's why we're not asking some other kinds of questions. It's why we are asking what's the wisest thing to do, and why we're not asking questions like this. Well, what's wrong with it? Because asking the question, what's wrong with something, doesn't always lead you into things that are right. To quote your mom, just because there's nothing wrong with it doesn't mean there's something right with it, right? Isn't that what your mom told you growing up? This is how 97.5% of affairs get started. I totally made that statistic up. I have no idea. But it seems like that, doesn't it? Where people say, you know, there's nothing wrong with a little extra conversation. There's nothing wrong with going out to coffee with them. And they're right, aren't they? There's nothing wrong with having a conversation. There's nothing wrong with having a cup of coffee with somebody. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. There's nothing wrong with volunteering to drive them across town. There's nothing wrong with some time on the phone. There's nothing wrong with a few text messages. We send text messages all the time. There's nothing wrong with those things. The question is, are they leading us to the best things? Asking what's wrong with it is not going to get you to the best things. The other questions that we're not asking are like this. What's my heart telling me about this? What's my gut telling me? This is a variation of trust your feelings. Now, my family and I just went out and watched that new Pixar movie, Inside Out. Have you seen this? It's all about how our emotions work. I got to tell you, I don't care how old you are, it is one of the most insightful movies about how our emotions work and why we need them. How we even need the emotions of anger and sadness in right ways to help us to be healthy. But the problem is our emotions are not good decision-making tools. Have you figured this out yet? Our emotions are great as warning lights on the dashboard of life to tell us that something is going on, but they don't do a great job as a GPS telling us which direction we ought to go. That's not the job of our emotions. Our emotions aren't stable. They change constantly with the circumstances that we're in. And we all know that highly charged emotional situations are not great circumstances in which to make a good decision, are they? You know, it's like that 19-year-old that shows up and his explanation of why they're going to get married is, we just love each other. Yeah, but you have no money. You have no job. I know, but love will conquer all. And the reason that you're laughing is because you know what's going to happen, right? Those heightened emotions are not providing the best set of circumstances under which to make a wise decision. That's why we don't ask the question, what's my heart telling me when it comes to making wise decisions? It's also why we're not asking the question, well, what's everyone else doing? Now, don't get me wrong. Getting a lot of counsel is not a bad idea. It's a great thing to do, to get wise counsel from other people. But asking what is everyone else doing will get you what everyone else is getting, won't it? I mean, it'll get you the same kind of marriage that everybody else has. It'll get you the same kind of financial situation that everybody else has. And can I just tell you that the financial situations and the condition of everyone else's marriage typically is not heading in a great direction. Have you ever noticed, and I noticed this with myself just the other day, how everyone else seems to validate whatever I want to do? Have you noticed this? I drove my car, which is a 2003 Hyundai Santa Fe with the paint falling off of it. It's a great car, I'm telling you, runs great. It's fun to drive. It's got all the little bells and whistles on it. Not the newest car, but doesn't give me a lot of problems. Nice and cheap to run. I love it. My kids are embarrassed to ride in it, but I think it's great. And I pulled it into a parking lot the other day and was looking around where I went for a meeting with some friends of mine, and I was looking around at all the other cars parked in the parking lot, and they're all a lot newer. And nothing wrong with new cars. They're fine. But they were all a lot newer and a lot shinier and looked a lot nicer. And I found myself thinking, man, I wonder if I should buy a new car too. They might be a little embarrassed with my car parked next to them. And I decided they just need to get over that because I love my car, right? But isn't it amazing how what everyone else is doing starts to validate what we want to do? Man, I really want to buy a new car. Hey, look, everyone else is buying one. Hey, we should get a bigger house because look, everyone else is getting one. The things that we have a desire for in our own heart, we start to validate when we start looking at what everybody else is doing. We have such a tendency to want to talk ourselves out of what is the wisest thing to do. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about this when we talked about addictions. How we have this tendency to lie to ourselves. Not only do we have a tendency, we have a well-developed skill at lying to ourselves. Whenever we want something, whenever our appetite desires something, we go to work convincing ourselves why this thing's going to be good for me, why I should have this thing, and why it's not really going to be a problem, when we know all along that it isn't really great for us, and it probably will end up being a problem. We have a tendency to talk ourselves out of what's wise and usually talk ourselves into only the things we want. And we got to be careful the questions that we ask ourselves. That's why we're asking, what is the wisest thing to do? So if we're going to live with real wisdom, then there's some things that we're going to have to know about how wisdom works if we're going to really dive into them. If we're going to know how to live really with wisdom in our life and set that as the goal, to live lives that are filled with the wisest decisions, then we got to know this, that real wisdom begins with our reverence for and our submission to God. Real wisdom begins with our reverence for and our submission to God. Now, Solomon, who was the wisest person to ever live, and the reason that we can say Solomon was the wisest person to ever live is because God himself granted Solomon wisdom. Solomon was the son of David. He was alive during the heyday of David's reign, when Israel was booming as a country. And Solomon came into that as a young person, and God was going to make Solomon the king after David had been the king. And so God appears to Solomon, shows up for Solomon and says, ask me anything. You're going to be king. I want to make sure you got all the stuff you need to be king. Ask me for anything. And Solomon says, man, I could ask for wealth. I could ask for military power. I could ask for a lot of influence. But you know what I'm really going to need? I'm really going to need wisdom. God, if you could just give me wisdom so that I can understand how to rule your people correctly. And God said, hey, Solomon, great ask. Way to go. And because you didn't ask for riches, because you didn't ask for military power, because you didn't ask for fame and notoriety, I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and give you what you asked for. I'm going to give you wisdom, and I'm going to give you all that other stuff too. And Israel became the wealthiest nation of that day. Solomon became one of the most powerful kings to ever live, one of the most wealthy kings to ever live, and arguably the wisest king to ever live on the earth. People would line up to hear Solomon's wisdom. Other kings would sail to the shores of Israel to hear Solomon's wisdom. And he wrote that wisdom down for us in books that we call the books of wisdom that are in the Bible. And in the book of Proverbs, which is called a book of wisdom in the Bible, in Proverbs chapter 9, Solomon wrote this for us. He says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And I realize that can bug us just a little bit because we don't want to be afraid of God. We think if God is loving and good and kind and all those kind of things, we shouldn't really have to be afraid of God. So what's this fear of God thing? Right? But you need to understand the way he's using this word. What he's saying is that wisdom about anything requires an immense amount of reverence for that will lead us to a submission to that thing. He says the fear that he's talking about is this deep reverence for that leads us to submission. So we need to understand it this way, that wisdom about anything, whether it's life or anything we're dealing with, wisdom about anything requires that we have a deep reverence for, a submission to, and a knowledge of that thing. When maybe a year ago or so, my wife came home from work one day, and our boys had been at home for a little while by then. And my wife came and parked the car in the garage. She got out of the car, and she started noticing that it smelled kind of funny in the garage. Now, those of you who have been around here for a while know I have 3 teenage sons, 17, 16, and 14. All of them are still alive so far. My wife gets out of the car, garage smells a little bit funny. She goes inside the house. The entire house just reeks on the inside of Axe body spray. Now, this is not an endorsement for Axe body spray, and I'm not making a recommendation of what you should do with it. But the house reeks of Axe body spray, and here are two of our sons who will remain nameless, but it was the middle one and the younger one, in case you wanted to know. Standing there almost at attention with like halos glowing over their head. You know, you see, ding, right? And of course, my wife has lived with these children long enough to know that she ought to be a little bit suspicious because the house reeks of Axe body spray and they're standing there like they did nothing wrong. So she says, "How's it going?" "It's fine. How are you?" She sits down at the kitchen table. That's a wood top table that's, and she starts noticing that in the finish of the table, there's some places that are kind of bubbled up on the table. And she said, "Why is the table bubbled up right here?" "Oh, well, we were watching Mythbusters." You know this Discovery Channel show where they do all kinds of science stuff on it, right? And they showed on there how Axe body spray is flammable. So we decided that we would spray some on the table and light it on fire. And that's why it's bubbled up like that. And of course, at this point, my wife can't speak. She is so shocked by what she's hearing. They took this highly flammable substance, sprayed it on our kitchen table, and lit it on fire. And she says to him, pretty much that right there, that's what she said first. And then she said, "What made you think it was okay to spray this on the table and light it on fire?" And then the older of the two says, "Well, nothing happened when we did it to the floor." We obviously have a couple of things to work on with our kids. One of them is deception. See, here's the problem. They didn't have enough reverence for fire to have wisdom about anything, about doing stuff with it, right? They didn't have a reverence that was leading them to submission to the principles of fire. They didn't realize that it had the power to burn our house down, obviously. And so they just acted with it however they wanted to. Wisdom about anything requires a reverence for the principles of it, a reverence for the properties of it. And when we're talking about reverence for God, when we're talking about wisdom when it comes to God, we don't begin to have wisdom about the things of God until we have a reverence for that leads to a submission to God. Now our boys have more of a reverence for fire based on knowledge and experience with fire. And that's how we gain our reverence for God, by knowledge that comes through experience with God, by knowing Him, by walking with Him, by reading His Word and knowing what God is about. And here's the deal. If we want to have wisdom about life, if we want to have wisdom about how to do this life, it is going to come from us having a reverence for that leads to a submission to the author of life, the one who knows how life works. So that's why Solomon can say that it's the fear of God that's the beginning of wisdom. And we don't start being wise until we reverence God enough that we begin to adjust our life in His direction, because He is the author of life. You see, we need a true north if we're going to know real wisdom. We need a standard by which to gauge our decisions by, to know whether they are just us making up a good idea or us actually moving in the direction of something that really is actually more wise than something else. It's like in that movie Apollo 13. Did you see this movie? They recounted the story of the Apollo 13 astronauts that were launched off on a mission to land on the moon. They had an explosion on the way to the moon, had to turn the ship around by flying it around the moon and bring it back to Earth. The problem was they were running out of energy in their batteries to maintain life support for the astronauts, so they had to shut everything off so that they could make it back to Earth. So they shut off all the guidance systems on this spaceship, on their space capsule, shut off everything. And they realized as they were heading back towards Earth, they were going to have to do another burn of the engines to get them back on the right course. The only problem was the guidance system was shut down. They couldn't start it back up because they would run out of power. How do you decide your direction when you have no guidance system? And then Tom Hanks, who was playing Jim Lovell, said, all we need is one fixed point in space. All we need is one fixed object that we can reference off of to know if we're heading in the right direction or not. And he looked out the window and sees the Earth in the window, and he says, I think we got one. We'll just aim at the Earth. That's not going anywhere. Let's just point at it. That's where we're headed. And he used that one fixed point so that they could light the engines and point it in that direction and know that they were headed in the best direction because they used that reference point. It's the same way that a map and a compass works. If you're lost out in the woods and you have a map, it's almost next to worthless unless you have a compass. Why would you need a compass and a map? Because a compass tells you one thing that's true, only one. It doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you one thing that's true that tells you everything else that's true. A compass tells you where true north is. And you take that compass and set it on the map, and then you adjust the map so that the legend of the map is pointing true north as well. And from that one piece of information about what is true, we learn what's true about everything around us. You see, we need that one fixed point in space. We need that one reference point, that point of true north, so that we know whether decisions are wise or not. Without it, we're just guessing at best. And whether you're a teenager or whether you're the Supreme Court of the United States, making decisions without knowing where true north is guessing at best about what is wise and what's not. Now, unless you've been living in a cave this week, and maybe you have, and we love people that live in caves, you know that the Supreme Court made a landmark decision this week about gay marriage in this country. And what you also know is that you're sitting in a room full of people who probably don't necessarily all have the same opinion about that decision that you probably do. So, and I would imagine that many of you are asking the question, so man, what does our church think about all that? Because that seems like that would affect our church a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you. This is what we believe. We believe that the God of creation, the God that has revealed himself to us through the pages of the Bible and through his son Jesus Christ, who walked on this earth as a man, lived a perfect life, was crucified, raised to life, and was sent back to heaven, that God who revealed himself to us that way is our true north. And we believe that the decisions that we make, not just because we're an institutional church, but because we're people trying to follow God, ought to be based on what God thinks and how he has revealed himself to us in the pages of Scripture and in the person of Jesus. And can I tell you, we don't always get that right. We try hard, but we don't always get that right. But we're trying. That's our true north. God is our fixed point that we are aiming after. And the decisions that we will make as an institutional church, as a group of leaders and elders and people together, are going to always try to be in that direction. Because of that, we're going to continue the practices about marriage that we have always had, where we have looked into the pages of the Bible and we believe that God is teaching us through the pages of Scripture that marriage should be between a man and a woman. And we're going to follow that. Please don't. I appreciate that, but again, let's hang on, because again, I realize we're sitting in a room where not everybody agrees with that, okay? And I appreciate your support and clapping, and that's great. It's good. So that means that that's how we're going to continue to practice. Let me tell you what else it means for us, too, because that's not all it means. It means that the doors of this church are always, always, always going to be open to anybody, no matter what color you are, no matter what gender you are, no matter what sexual orientation you are, no matter where you are on this journey of life, no matter how broken you are, no matter what your profession is. The doors of this church are always going to be open to anybody who legitimately wants to come and look at Jesus and do their best to follow him. We will never close the doors of the church to anybody. And you got to understand what a difficult line it is to walk sometimes, to continue to hold out the grace of our Lord and the truth of our Lord. Those are not in competition with one another, by the way. And that's what we're going to try to do, because we believe that God is our true north. And again, we don't always get it right. We don't always get it right. But we're going to do our best to do those things, to live out the truth of God and to love everyone like he has loved us. Because as long as you're sitting in these seats, you're admitting a couple of things. Number one, you're admitting that you're broken and messed up and you're a sinner and you need a Savior too. All of us, this guy included. In fact, maybe this guy especially. And that what we're all doing together as a church, as an institution, is all we're doing is saying to people, anybody can come and let's just look at Jesus. Don't look at me. Don't look at Kevin. Don't look at the institution of the church. We don't get it right all the time. Look at Jesus. He gets it right all the time. And we're just calling people together to come and look at him and to say, let's be like him. Let's do it his way. Let's love like he loves. So that's what we're going to do. And that's why we're going to do that. And can I just give us a word of caution as we express the opinions that we have? Because again, you're sitting in a room full of people who probably don't have the same opinions that you do. As we express those opinions, let's do that with kindness and the grace and the love of Jesus and the awareness that he is the one that's right, not us, and that we're just trying to follow him. Can we do that? And I think we'll be better if we do that. All right? Okay. All right, let's stop talking about that. Let's get back to this. Wisdom, right, means that we live with a reverence for and a submission to God based on knowing him and being involved with him. But also we got to get this about wisdom too. Real wisdom is also about action, not just information. It's about action, not just information. How many times have we known the best thing to do, we just didn't do it, right? Wisdom is about living those things out. In the book of James, this is James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote this: "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life and deeds done in humility that come from wisdom." So if you're really wise, let it be shown by how you live, by the things that you do, by deeds done in humility that come from wisdom. That's why we're asking the question, what's the wisest thing to do? Not just what's wise to think about, but what's the wisest thing to do? And there's some practical things that we can do if we're really going to live lives of wisdom, okay? We can do these things. First, we can notice what we're seeing. We can notice what it is that we see and how it is that we see these things. In Proverbs 17:24, it says this: "A discerning person keeps wisdom in view, but a fool's eyes wander to the ends of the earth." In other words, a fool looks everywhere to figure out what they're going to do, but a wise, discerning person keeps wisdom in view. They're constantly trying to see the wisest thing to do and have a perspective that includes God's wisdom in that perspective. Am I seeing this through the lens of God's wisdom? Another thing we can do if we want to live lives of wisdom is to notice what I'm starting. So not just notice what I'm seeing, but notice what I'm starting. Am I starting something that I cannot righteously continue? Am I starting something that I can't righteously continue? Proverbs 22:3 says this. It says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge." The wise people, they see danger coming and they take refuge. They don't keep going that way. It says, "But the simple just keep going and pay the penalty." Are you starting something that if you keep going in that direction, it's going to end you up in a bad place? Do you see the end of it from the beginning? What is the path that you are choosing when you are choosing to start something? But it's just a conversation with her. I'm just calling this guy back. I'm just having dinner. What are you starting that you can't righteously continue? And the third thing, if we want to have a heart of wisdom, we got to notice who we're shadowing. Notice who we're shadowing. what we're seeing, what we're starting, and who we're shadowing. Is there somebody that I am setting as the picture of what I want to become in my life that I cannot righteously follow? That I can admire where they've got, but if I continue following in their footsteps and believing what they believe and valuing what they value, I'm going to end up in a place that I really don't want to be. That's our tendency as people, to find somebody that seems like they are where we want to be, and we shadow them. I mean, whether we do it intentionally, whether we do it actively or not, we gain a picture of what our life can become by looking around at what others have become. And we got to be careful the picture that we allow to develop of what we want to become. Proverbs 13:20 says this, "Walk with the wise and become wise." When you walk with the wise people, you become more wise. But a companion of fools suffers harm. So in other words, if you're keeping in step with people who are wise, you'll become wise. But if you walk and keep in step with somebody who's a fool, I expected it to say you become more foolish, didn't you? That's not what it says. It says if you continue to walk with somebody who's foolish, you'll suffer because of their foolishness. And you've seen that time and time again. It's why parents are so concerned about who their kids are hanging out with, isn't it? It's why wives are concerned about who their husbands are hanging out with and vice versa. Because they see the influence that other people can have on them. And they're not afraid of them becoming fools like them. They're afraid of them suffering the same harm that that person's going to suffer because they were with them. Who am I admiring? Who am I patterning myself after? We ask the question, what is the wisest thing to do? Okay, now I'm going to tell you the hard part. All of that's true, all of that's good, and you can apply that to your life and your life will be better. But let me tell you the hard part. There are 3 words that will kill wisdom in your life and in my life. You know what they are? I know better. Not the I know better like, yeah, I know better than to do that. The I know better like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I know better. Yeah, I know what God says, but I know better. In 2011, there were 3 20-year-old young people that were killed in Yosemite Valley. I was in Fresno visiting my mom and dad, and so I heard this story. It's a terrible tragedy. They were from a church group. They had gotten together with their church group and gone up to Yosemite Valley to enjoy the day up there and see the waterfalls that were flowing. There was water in California back then. Waterfalls were flowing. And they decided that they were going to take a little dip in the Merced River that flows over Vernal Falls, which is a 300-foot waterfall. And this was from the news report about what happened to them. The group was witnessed entering the water above Vernal Falls, approximately 25 feet. Now, to give you an idea of how far 25 feet is, I mean, that's from here about to where that guitar is sitting. Not very far. 25 feet from a 300-foot waterfall. Witnesses reported to the park officials that several people urged the group to get back from the river since it was flowing so swiftly and extremely cold. The area is signed as a dangerous area. They have these signs posted right here by that river. It says, danger, waterfall, stay out of the water. Powerful hidden currents will carry you over the fall. Not might, will carry you over the falls. Stay back from slippery rock at the water's edge. If you go over the falls, you will die. I'm wondering how much more clear this sign can be. It says the area was signed as a dangerous area. They'd been urged by friends to get back, and the group had crossed a metal guardrail placed to keep them out of the river. And guess what happened? Current caught one of them. Another one tried to save him. Another one tried to save him, and all 3 of them went over the falls and died. Because they knew better. They knew better than all their friends. They knew better than the signs. They knew better than the guy who put up the metal barricade. It's not because they were bad people. They were with a church group. These were nice people. They were family people. They're people just like us. But something in their head told them, after all of those warnings, I know better. We mentioned King Solomon before, the wisest man in the world. Do you think the wisest man in the world would be able to see danger coming and know better, know how to make a wise decision? If anybody knew how to make a wise decision, he did. People lined up from other countries, kings of other lands would come and listen to Solomon because he could make a wise decision. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women, the book of 1 Kings tells us. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. What's the matter with this? Maybe it was just a different time, a different culture, right? The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, clearly instructed, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Think they didn't have a little influence on his life? And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. God had appeared to Solomon in person twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. This is the wisest person to ever live except Jesus, right? So now the Lord said to him, since you've not kept my command and have disobeyed my decrees, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. Because Solomon knew better than even what God told him. You see, it's in those moments of decision that we got to decide who it is that really knows best. Who it is that really is true north. Because we will decide something. We will make a decision of some kind that will ultimately be connected to the outcome that we experience. And it's an irony, it's a curiosity to me that Solomon would write it this way, this warning to us. He would say, wisdom shouts in the streets. He paints the picture of wisdom being this woman who is crying in the streets. She cries in the public square. She calls to the crowd along Main Street, to those gathered in front of the city gate. How long will you simpletons, will you insist on being simple-minded? How long will you mockers relish your mocking? How long will you fools hate knowledge? Come and listen to my counsel. I'll share my heart with you. I will make you wise if you will just come and listen to me. I called you so often, but you wouldn't come. I reached out to you, but you paid no attention. You ignored my advice and rejected the correction I offered, so I will laugh at you when you're in trouble. I will mock you when disaster overtakes you. Ever had that happen? When you have made a choice that you know is wrong, and then you sit there in your regret and you go, if I would have done what I should have done, this could have all been different. And it's like wisdom mocks us because it's right there. It's so clear. We knew what to do. I'll mock you when disaster overtakes you, when calamity overtakes you like a storm, when disaster engulfs you like a cyclone, and anguish and distress overwhelm you. When they cry for help, I will not answer. Though they anxiously search for me, they won't find me, for they hated knowledge and chose not to fear the Lord. They rejected my advice and paid no attention when I corrected them. Therefore, they must eat the bitter fruit of living their own way, choking on their own schemes. For simpletons turn away from me to death. Fools are destroyed by their own complacency. But listen to the turn here. Listen to the hope here. But all who will listen to me, everyone who will listen to me, anybody who will come and just sit at the feet of wisdom and ask the question, what is the wisest thing to do here? All who will listen to me will live in peace, untroubled by fear of harm. So, what happened to you? How'd you get that way? Tell me about your life. Well, I decided that I didn't want to be sitting at the end of my life going, woulda, shoulda, coulda. I decided that when I got to the end of my life, I didn't want those right things that I knew that I should do to be sitting there mocking me because I ignored them. I decided that I was going to find out what the wisest thing to do was, and I was going to do it. And when we do that, we begin to find the peace, the grace, the goodness of our God as He leads us into the best things for us. The challenge to all of us is to ask the question, to keep asking the question, and heed the direction that's given to us when we say, what is the wisest thing for me to do? Let's stand together and pray. Father, we're grateful to you that you don't just leave us on our own, because the world is complex, it's difficult to navigate, and knowing what to do is often a difficult thing to figure out. But God, thank you for your wisdom that you give to us, so that when we ask what's the wisest thing to do, and we look to you as our true north, God, you begin to lead us into the best things that we could have ever imagined. God, help us to do that, to be courageous, to answer that question, and to decide differently. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. God bless you guys. Thanks for hanging in here. We'll see you next week.